House of the Dragon. Now I know what you might think. Wasn't that over long ago? After that season 8, is there still even hype for this? Turns out, yes there is. House of the Dragon released just recently, and to my surprise, to very good reviews. So I thought, why not check it out? I loved the first couple of seasons of Game of Thrones. Turns out, it is great. Now I know what you might think. But this isn't the Song of Ice and Fire. How could it be good? It doesn't have the magical touch of George R. R. Martin. And that's where you're wrong. George R. R. Martin has played a huge role in production of this series, and it's based on one of his obscure releases, Fire and Blood, back in 2018, where he wrote about the Targaryen dynasty. Now, to get into my first impressions of these two episodes, I have to start out with the characters, and I'll just start out by saying Rhaenyra and Daemon are great. They're both played by competent actors who've already shown decent range within these first two episodes, and I've, surprisingly, grown more attached to the characters in just these two episodes than, dare I say, I did in the first two episodes of the Game of Thrones series. I particularly really love Matt Smith's portrayal of Daemon Targaryen. I think they're setting him up to be the villain, but I think he's handled with a lot more care. He is a lot more empathetic and interesting, in my opinion, than the Lannisters were. A lot of people often laud the Game of Thrones for having these gray characters and stuff, but I think in a lot of ways, the Lannisters, who were the main villains throughout most of the Game of Thrones series, were just really like black characters. You have Tyrion, who's pretty much a good guy, then you have Jaime Lannister, who is really a prick throughout most of the first seasons, and then you have Cersei, who is completely evil, Joffrey, who is completely evil, and Tywin, who's completely evil, and they're all like the main baddies in Westeros throughout most of the series. And those are actually some of my gripes with the Game of Thrones series. The House of the Dragon is more gray in that area. You know, the characters, the villains, are actually gray so far. We haven't really been introduced to a purely evil character, like there are plenty of in the Game of Thrones. Viserys, the king, is great. He actually seems like he wants to be a great father, although he has a lot of flaws. And his advisors aren't just the purely lusting, manipulating, power-hungry schemers, and actually seems to, in their own way, want the best for their people, despite being obviously very selfish and power-hungry. I also really like the a woman can't be heir angle. It's really overdone in movies and TV shows, but I think it fits in very well in this case, especially because of the connection with Rhaenyra's character arc, and her wants and needs very much align with that very issue, and she also has opportunities to bounce off another character who has gone through those same issues and who has a completely different outlook on that heir angle than she has. Some of the characterization is really on the nose early on, but it gets going fast, and there's also a great deal of subtlety with the scheming and the political angle of the series that I think is very well done. And obviously, it's very nerve-wracking and exhilarating to watch. I think the story here handles stakes perfectly, as Game of Thrones did. There's this really great scene in episode 1, a tournament scene with a lot of political intrigue and a lot of stakes. I found myself rooting for a specific character pretty early on. It was an interesting little side narrative that really added tension to the tournament scene, whilst we also had another scene that took place separately at the same time that had a lot of tension, and then the political intrigue that was very interestingly crafted really created like one of the most tense sections of an episode I've seen in a while. There are not a lot of television series where I felt that tensed up and into the scene as early on as I was in this episode. This was in the first episode, and I was completely glued to the screen throughout. It was amazingly done. And with regards to the production value, it's great. On par with some of the later seasons of Game of Thrones, even. And I love the costume designing. It feels immersive, and it manages to get me into the world pretty quickly. And I thought the costumes were great. I liked that they leaned into the more realistic side of medieval fantasy. I really loved that they had those bulging breastplates and the ugly helmets that people actually used during medieval times, instead of having those overly fantastical breastplates that just accentuates the masculine features of any given character. Obviously, you also have some of the Targaryen dragon-inspired clothing and armor, but it still managed to be, although more fantastical, not over the top, and still very well done. So overall, I'm just really excited for this series. It seems like it knows where it wants to go, and that's great. There's one thing I'm worried about, however, and that is I've heard the two very prominent characters, Alicent Hightower and Rhaenyra, are going to be replaced by older actors in what's going to be a 10-year time skip halfway throughout the series. The showrunners have stated that this is because the characters, Alicent Hightower and Rhaenyra, the main character, are 14 in the series, and they want to make a clear distinction between the child versions of these characters and then the adult versions. And I can kind of understand that, but the actors who plays these 14-year-old characters are 19 and 22. None of them look 14. So in my opinion, they could have just easily stated the times past, pretend like they're now the ages that they're supposed to be, maybe make them look slightly older like they do with all the other characters. None of the other characters are going to be replaced except for another 12-year-old girl who has a minor role. What I worry about is that in movies and television, viewers often instinctually attribute their attachment to the characters to the actor or actress's likeness. There are a multitude of movies and TV shows where if the transition isn't handled right, it kind of feels like the new actor isn't really the same character. You have a hard time comparing these two characters and seeing both of these two actors as the same person. So I just think it's kind of an unnecessary risk. But the show has shown great writing so far. So overall, I'm not that worried, as long as they handle the transition delicately and the characters don't change completely from one actor to the next. But that was it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed, please go watch 2 of my other videos. Like, subscribe, engagement will drive up this video. If you guys loved it, please show the appreciation and have fun.